Hey, what's up guys? It's Jonathan and welcome back to another episode of Battle of the Portraits. If you haven't seen the first two episodes, make sure you do it. So that's what it is. That way you can be up to date on who won what and what this is all about. In this episode, we're gonna be taking a look at the OnePlus 5T versus the Essential phone in Battle of the Portraits. So let's go ahead and kick this thing off. It's time for specs. The OnePlus 5T has a dual camera system, not one, with a 16 megapixel and a 20 megapixel camera, both with an aperture of f1.7. On the front, you have another 16 megapixel camera with an aperture of f2.0. However, neither one of these phones do support front-facing portrait modes, just letting you know. Damn. The Essential phone is also rocking a dual camera system. One camera is RGB while the other is monochrome. Both are 13 megapixels with an aperture of f1.85. On the front, you're gonna find an 8 megapixel camera with an aperture of f2.2. So that's enough of the specs. Let's go ahead and dive into the heart of the video. The Essential phone and the OnePlus 5 were actually extremely similar to use since both use nearly identical portrait mode methods. This means the amount of lighting and distance required was pretty much the same. The biggest issue with usability came from the Essential phone when many times the app just wouldn't save the image. Keep in mind, we're only judging portrait mode abilities and not image quality per se when it comes to these pictures. Alright, so let's begin analyzing here. Starting with the OnePlus 5T image, it did a fantastic job at separating the subject from the background. In fact, the only true issue I see here is right above my wife's left shoulder, where one of the posts is completely in focus. On the Essential phone, I left a huge chunk of the Epcot ball completely in focus, which is really weird. The OnePlus 5T definitely did better here. This is another win for the OnePlus 5T, producing great subject and background separation, and the bokeh roll-off is near perfect. The only true issue I see here is my wife's left arm. It attempted to blur it out. On the Essential phone, it failed to blur out the space between my wife's right arm and torso. It also blurred out quite a bit of her hair and even more in the spot on her left arm, where the OnePlus 5T had a hard time. On these two shots, both phones performed extremely well at separating the subject. At first I was going to give it to the OnePlus 5T, but on close inspection it actually messed up a tiny bit to the right of my wife's head by attempting to bring out the black dot in focus. The Essential phone also messed up in this area, however it was much less noticeable. The biggest defining characteristic for me was just how wonderful the bokeh roll-off is on the Essential phone. It looks far more natural than the OnePlus 5T. I'm gonna have to give this one to the Essential phone. This is a shot from the side to test how well it can handle portrait mode without a face. Both phones did much better than I expected. The OnePlus 5T messed up slightly on the left side of my wife's hair and on the monorail. Also, it didn't quite get the bottom left of her shirt. The Essential phone completely blurred out the top part of my wife's hair, and that's it. However, being that it is much more noticeable, I'm gonna have to give this one to the OnePlus 5T. These two images were much more difficult to pick from. I honestly had to go through each with a magnifying glass. The OnePlus 5T has much more prominent background blur, which does look incredible. However, because of how strong it is, it brings out the small defects more. If you look around the edges of the subject, you can see weird distortion where it attempted to keep the background in focus and blur out the subject at the same time. The Essential phone was nearly perfect with subtle roll-off and no errors. These were definitely two of my favorite images of the evening. Both performed excellent, however the OnePlus performed extremely well. I cannot find a big enough defect in the image worth talking about. The Essential phone, however, failed slightly to the right of my wife's hair and on the top of her hair. It also did not blur out the gap between her right arm and torso. Changing up the subjects, on these two images both failed to blur out the left part of my glasses. However, other than that, the Essential phone was nearly perfect. The OnePlus kept a huge portion of the ground in focus right below my face. Between these two, the Essential definitely did better. These two pictures were taken much darker, as you could tell by the noise. The OnePlus 5T actually did amazing here, and I couldn't see any defects worth mentioning. The Essential phone did the weird edge blur thing that we have seen before. The OnePlus definitely looks better in my personal opinion. Looking at low light here, I'm actually blown away. Both phones did absolutely fantastic here. The only true mistake I could see between the two for the defining factor is the area between the subjects on the Essential phone where it failed to blur out the background. The OnePlus 5T simply crushed the blacks in this, that way it didn't have this issue. Also, the bokeh balls on the OnePlus 5T look much better. With that being said, that brings us to the winner of this episode, the OnePlus 5T with a 6-3 victory. Both phones did fantastic, and factoring in their price points, I was actually really surprised how well they stood up to each other. Well guys, that's another episode of Battle of the Portraits. I hope you're enjoying the series as much as I am. If you are, make sure you hit that like button. If you're new here, stick around by subscribing. If you're not new here, make sure you got those notifications turned on so you can be alerted when my new videos drop. If you have any questions, leave them down below in a comment or hit me up on social, and I'll talk to you in the next one.